We would like to welcome you to this week's edition of the St. Mark's Spark. It is good to be with you here on a beautiful Thursday afternoon. Normally we come together on Wednesday, but I was down in Springfield yesterday celebrating with my parents on their 65th wedding anniversary. So happy anniversary to my folks, Stan and Ruth. But it is glad and a good thing yesterday and glad and a good thing today to be together. We are going to be in Matthew's Gospel with our daily lectionary reading. This is the Sermon on the Mount, the greatest sermon that was ever preached. It is Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Most people who do know the Sermon on the Mount likely know Matthew 5, verses 1 through 9, 1 through 11. We go through the Sermon on the Mount part of the Beatitudes, or that part, blessed are those. And it's all these unexpected blessings in ways to better understand when we are getting closer to God, and essentially kind of a point of personal privilege. Although it's not the reading for today, it's important to know that all of the blessings that are laid out, that Jesus lays out to the disciples and then to the people who are overhearing on the mountain, all of these blessings come when we recognize our relationship with God, that God is God and that we are not. That when there is less of us, there is more of God. So when there's less of us, when we are meek, there is more of God. When we are content with who we are, no more, no less, that is when we discover we are the proud owners of everything that cannot be bought. When we are peacemakers, when it's not about us hitting back and it's living out what God wants us to be, that is when we are called children of God. And so, encourage you, if you are reading along, to go to Matthew chapter 5, the beginning, and to read through the Beatitudes, words to live by, words that are challenging. We also have here in Matthew chapter 5, the lectionary reading for the day starts at verse 27. We're actually going to pick up at verse 33. I do want to give some context as we prepare to hear from beginning at verse 33. Jesus is talking to the disciples and he says, "You have heard it say." And anytime Jesus says, "You have heard it say," you better buckle up, because he talks about, you've heard it say, do not commit murder. But anybody who calls somebody, but I say to you, anybody who calls someone a raka or a blockhead, a Charlie Brown insult, you might think I've never murdered anybody, so I'm good. And Jesus says, if you are angry, if you are letting angry words come out of your mouth, then this is sin. And likewise, he says, you've heard it say, do not commit adultery. And I would say, well, I've never done that. And then Jesus says, you've heard it say this, but I say to you, everyone that looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery in their heart. This is the famous interview for Jimmy Carter, almost 50 years ago now, where he talked about this very thing about having lust in his heart, and everyone started making fun of him. But the words that Jimmy Carter was speaking were straight out of Matthew chapter 5. And so it's a lot harder to say that we've not committed adultery when we have all looked at various times with lust in our hearts and with lust in our eyes. So Jesus, in fact, is making the way far more narrow in eliminating the spots where we can be self-righteous or self-assured, or again, think that is about ourselves. A reminder again, when we hear the Beatitudes, it's much more about understanding what we are and who God is and where our relationship is. And we might feel small in that, but as we are small, we are then taken up more into God's love and God's plan. Starting here at Matthew 5, verse 33. Again, you have heard it was said to those of ancient times, you shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord. But I say to you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one. May this God's word speak to our hearts, our minds, our spirits. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. There is a story. I do not know if it is apocryphal. I do not have the time or energy or strength, bandwidth to look it up. So let's just assume this story is true. It is a story about Calvin Coolidge. Calvin Coolidge, whose nickname was Silent Cal because he was a thinker, he was a doer, but he was not known to be much of a talker. And at a dinner party, there was a woman who came up to Calvin Coolidge, President Coolidge, and said, "I've made a bet with my husband that I can get you to say more than 2 words." Coolidge, Calvin Coolidge looked at her and simply said the words, "You lose." Just those 2 words. Maybe we are reminded of the Mark Twain quote, "It is best to keep silent and be thought a fool than to open one's mouth and to remove all doubt." There are some folks who talk a lot. There's some folks who brag a lot. There's some people who boast a lot. There's some people who talk so much because they're always trying to draw all conversations back to themselves, their accomplishments, their triumphs, their ills, their ways they've been mistreated. And they're always talking. And so what we're going to focus on mainly today is Jesus' words, "Let your yes be yes and your no be no." If you say the word yes to something, people trust you because they trust you. If you say the word no, it might not be the answer they want to get, but they trust you because they trust you. Have you ever been around some folks who you feel the more that they talk, the less that you believe them? This is where we oftentimes find ourselves with salesmen, with politicians, sometimes with clergy as well, where the more that we talk, the more that we try to convince, the more likely it does not ring true, it rings hollow. So let your yes be yes, let your no be no. And Jesus starts off this again with the familiar beginning, "You have heard it said, but I say to you." You have heard it said to those of ancient times, "You shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord." This is a good instruction. You shall not swear falsely. You shall not lie. You shall not misrepresent. You shall not deceive. You shall not swear falsely. Now, this is the big thing, like murder or adultery or swearing falsely. And we can say, well, I don't do those things. But Jesus says, "But I say to you, do not swear at all." Do not swear at all. Don't swear by heaven, it's the throne of God. Don't swear by earth because it's God's footstool. Don't swear by Jerusalem, for it is a city of the great king. Don't swear by any of these things. Don't try to convince people that you are right. Show them that you are righteous in the way that you live. So oftentimes we get caught in this trap of thinking it is in our words that we are going to convince people. It is in our language. It is in our persuasiveness. And I think it's Young Life, the parachurch group that works with teenagers. The founder of that had a saying that it's still repeated, I believe. It said, "Win the right to be heard." Win the right to be heard. It means be in relationship with people. Be in relationship with people, not because of what you get out of it, but because what you can give in that relationship. Be in a relationship with someone where when you do share the good news, or when you do share something that is difficult or hopeful, the relationship's there that they're going to trust you. Win the right to be heard. This is oftentimes a critique of many mission trips that people go on. And in fact, we were on a mission trip, I guess probably about 20 years ago in San Francisco with a great group. It was called YouthWorks. And what YouthWorks had set up everything, it was a nice thing because all we had to do was pay the fee, show up. They had our housing, they had our food, they had the devotional set up, and they had the activities and the missions that we were going to do. And one of the things that they had lifted up was that we were going to go to different places and bring food, but also focus on listening to people, not preaching at them, but listening to people, asking them questions, being in that moment with them. Well, our group had maybe 8, 10 of us who were there. And then there's also a rather large group that was there from Michigan, 50 or 60 kids that were there, and kind of made our group feel small. They're nice enough kids and nice enough adults and all that stuff, but it felt like, well, they're a bigger church. They have more things going on, and we spent several days, several afternoons at a place called Hunters Point in San Francisco. It was the roughest of the rough spots, or one of the rougher spots in the city. And we were working at a youth center, and it was really impactful. They had pictures of kids who had grown up through that center who had died because of gun violence, and a lot of these kids, this was the only time where maybe folks were really taking an interest in their lives, and we took to heart, at least our group was we were just wanting to get to know them and be present, play games, but share the gospel, I guess, in the way that we were living with them. And there was another thing that I will never forget. There was a couple, I think, well-meaning teenagers who had been there for a day or two, and they'd been playing and hanging around this one young girl. And they said to me as they were walking over to talk to her, "We're going to go have the talk." And I said, "Well, what talk?" And they said, "Well, the talk about saving her soul." And I had the response, I did not want to burst their balloon, but I had the thought of, it's been one day since you've known this person. This person is so desperate for attention, so desperate to be seen, so desperate to be heard, that she's going to do whatever it takes to have that connection. But the thing is, with these missions, you parachute in and then you parachute right back out. And I know that YouthWorks was going to be at this community center for the whole summer, and I imagine that girl got saved every week because what she wanted more than anything is for other people to see her. And I think so oftentimes, even in the church, and so many times, there's this idea of notching up marks or putting up notches on our spiritual bedpost. So people that we have saved, or people that we have changed their lives. But that does happen, but it does not happen in an instant. It happens when you have made a connection where people trust you. Sarah and I have talked about her work in the school, in teaching, my work in the church, of saying this is the long game. This is the long game. Integrity is always the long game. Someone might say something about you that is disparaging, and it might be so tempting to say something back, but you will be undermining yourself in the future. Somebody might be trying to undercut you, or somebody might be trying to hurt you, or they might not be fully doing their job, and you might want to lash out, but that's going to hurt you in the long run. This whole idea of talking less and just saying yes or no to things is completely rooted in people trust you. Trust you that when you say it, it comes from the heart. Trust you that when you say it, it's going to get done. Friends, this is not an easy task. It'd be a lot easier if Jesus just said, "Don't swear falsely," and we'd be good. Don't swear falsely and carry out the vows you made to the Lord. It might be a little bit of a challenge, but we would stick to it. But Jesus says it's more than that. Don't swear at all. Don't, in your words, try to convey something that you're not willing to do with your actions. And there are yeah buts. And there are places we look out in the world and we say, yeah, but what's going on in Washington, D.C., or what's going on in Jefferson City, or what's going on at City Hall locally? And we look and go, yeah, but they're not. I don't care. Jesus does not care. The Bible does not care. Scripture does not care about that. So sometimes we want to point at others as somehow to excuse ourselves. But integrity is the way we act when no one is watching. Integrity is the way that we live. That when we just say a one word answer, it is enough. So may you strive to live a life where you don't have to explain yourself. May you strive to live a life where others know you are who you are. May you strive to live a life to recognize that we're not always going to be able to do this, and we're going to get tired, and we're going to get weary, and we're going to be tempted to do all kinds of things. But may there be less of you, and when there is, that there might be more of God. And may your yes be yes, and may your no be no. And may you know in your heart that the God of all creation, the God who is above time, the God who created time, the God who inserted God's self into time, is the God who said yes to you. So full of that hope, so full of that confidence. Can you just how can you keep from just saying yes back? It is in the love of God that we deliver these messages. It is in the promise and the hope as we get ready next week for Ash Wednesday and the beginning of Lent. It is in that sure and certain knowledge that God says yes, that we can respond likewise. May God be with you all.